The next speaker will be talking about challenges and possibilities of intangible cultural heritage in the era of convergence and creativity. We have Professor of the Department of Information and Communication at University of Paris, Nanterre, France, Marta Severo. Professor Marta Severo's research focuses on action research in social sciences through web-based data, and her research activities focuses on two thematic areas, which is the collaborative construction of cultural heritage and memories on the web, and the digital representations of place and space. Recently, she wrote a book on participatory command, and also she was a part of editing in Intangible and Digital Cultural Heritage and Digital Traces and Domains. A big round of applause, please, for Professor Severo.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank you, the organizers, for this invitation. And so my talk is really related to the previous one. I will also speak on the impact of new technologies, and especially I will focus on inventory buildings and the approach of institutions of using new technology in this area. So I organize my talk in 3 times. Before I will quickly introduce the context, the challenge of new technology in building ICH inventories. Then I will present 3 case studies, different from the previous one, of Marilena. And finally, I will analyze this case study on focusing on the documentary aspect of the inventories. So, okay. In my view, we have, as also previous speaker presented, we have really a documentary paradox. On one side, ACH inventories are documents. I think that's interesting to recall the definition of document, the most famous one of Susan Brie. Document is any concrete symbolic indication preserved or recorded for constructing or proving a phenomenon. So document is an evidence, is meant to fix something. The very famous example provided by Susan Brie is the example of antelope, that when you see in the natural environment, it's just an animal, but when you take it and you put in a zoo, it becomes an evidence of the species, so it's fixed in a time. On the other side, ACH is really the challenge of ACH, as we told, is to keep the relation with the community, to not fix it, to safeguard it in its changeable nature. Now, also UNESCO tried to find solution, just to recall, the register of good practice is a way to try to safeguard the practice of guarding and not just objects. So to keep this changeable nature. And we can also, I put this screen catcher also to show not that when you have an application to UNESCO, you have to buy videos and photos. So material that should help to keep this changeable nature. So I will focus on the impact of new technology, a specific type of new technologies that are social web. And it's important to recall, because today when we think on social media, we think to the GAFA, to the threat of the social media. But in the very nature of social media, we have participatory culture, as Marilena, in the example of Marilena, we saw is the bottom nature, the possible of interact, of the empowerment of community. There was, it's important to also recall the work of the scholar Shannon Pietro-Bruno, that a few years ago studied the communication on social media related to the item of Melevi's ceremony, and show how YouTube can provide different example of the practice different from the application that you have in YouTube, because you can have video where women are present or where you have colorful dresses. And so these examples show the creative possibility that open new technology in the field of building inventories. So I will focus on three examples that are related to institutions, to national institutions, because it's important to keep in mind that national inventories is a task of the state. The first example is quite peculiar because the example of Scotland is important to underline that cannot sign the convention. Anyway, it was the first example of participatory inventory of living heritage. In the first form, it was created by some scholar of the University, the McClary of the University of Edinburgh, Napier, on the demand of the Museum Gallery Scotland, and the form was a media wiki, a very open wiki, where everyone could add a file concerning a practice. There was not necessary to create an account. Few years later, the Museum Gallery Scotland decided to change the form, and we have a Drupal website, a more structured website that is still open to contribution, but you have to ask for an account. You cannot create categories, but you have to keep to be coherent with the structure already established by the institution. So you see there are some, like say, contradiction between the openness of a wiki and the constraint that the institution has to set. The second example is the same example of the excellent example of Finland, where the National Council of Antiquities provides several tools that support bottom-up inventories at the national level. The first one is this wiki inventory. The tool is the same, is a media wiki. In this case, you need to register to write a file or to contribute to an existing file, but registration is open to everyone. Anyway, it's important to underline that there is another tool. There are the small circle of people related to specific ACH categories. And these circles are really the circle that define the official file that is inscribed on the national inventory. So also this time you have two tools. You have the wiki that is very open, but there is also an institutional form, and the interaction between the two is not really transparent anyway. Not all files become files in the national inventory. The third one is the example of France. In France, in 2016, a new website, a new platform for HCH was published. Is the PCA Lab platform. This platform published the official files of the defined by the Ministry for Culture. At the same time, this platform is based on semantic web, and so information are also connected to Wikidata in order to have an interactive research in multi-language. So to do this, all files of the national inventory are also present on the Wikipedia form or the French edition of Wikipedia. What is interesting is that, so at the end, you have three way of publishing a ACH file. The first one is the PDF on the official website of the ministry, but it's not so interactive, so interesting for the accessibility. We saw previously in previous talk, accessibility is key point. The second is the PCA Lab, so a more interactive platform to access to ECH, and the third one is this file on Wikipedia. But what is happening is we don't have the same content. Actually, with the files on Wikipedia I took the example of Wokak that was inscribed on the UNESCO list in 2014. Defining Wikipedia existed before the inscription on UNESCO and on the national inventory, and contains different content. For example, if we take the national file of the French inventory for Quokka, the content is more focused more on the transmission of the practice. And if we take on the Wikipedia page, it focuses more on the performance of the and on some controversies about the style of music. So what is happening in Wikipedia? In Wikipedia, we have different actors, different kind of contributors. We have the ACH professional of the Ministry of Culture that publish the files in order to fill the official website related to Wikidata. But we have also the Wikipedia administrator. We have some technician of Wikipedia that correct the grammar and so on. And we have a lot of amateurs that can intervene on very different kind of subjects. Today they work on ACH files, tomorrow they work on writers, the day after they work on games pages and so on. Finally, we have a few people that are really interested in specific practice, for example, work, and they intervene on specific page with a very important expertise. So if we take, for example, this slide represents the evolution of the content of the page of Quokka through time. The page was created in 2006 and is still ongoing. And you see that the content grew up importantly after the inscription in 2014. So if in 2014 the official file is fixed in some way, the page on Wikipedia evolves in the year after. So my problem is that these three examples show there is kind of ambiguities and controversies in opening up inventories through new technologies, and notably bottom-up technologies like Wikipedia that allow to create shared knowledge, but also making possible to define the limits of intervention by communities. So at this point, it is interesting to try to understand which is the normative power of this kind of inventory, which is the relation between this inventory and the official inventories, which is, if there are the official inventory, how they can really accompany the definition of ACH in a flexible way. So to answer this question, it's important for me to come back to the definition of document. I will use the definition of document provided by an Italian philosopher called Maurizio Ferraris that proposed this documentary pyramid. According to his definitions, it's important to distinguish trace and document. Anyways, it defines 4 levels of type of document. The trace is just when you have the event, something is happening with no intention and no registration. Then to go up toward document, we have the registration when the trace is kept in a kind of support. So for example, there is social media that keep trace of our action. Then that is not enough to speak about the document, because we need also an intention. When we have an intention to share this registration, we have an inscription, we have a social fact. So we have something that has social value, but it's not enough. According to Maurizio Ferrari, we speak document when we have an institutionalization of the trace. We have a fixation of the trace. So according to this first definition, what we have on the wiki is not really a document, so is not comparable to an inventory until that we don't have an institutionalization. But what is interesting is that, according to this philosopher, new technologies makes necessary to distinguish today 2 types of document. It's not so easy as in the before just when we have written document. It distinguishes weak documents and strong documents. Both have social value, but strong documents as the one that have normative institutional value, and weak documents are the one that have just social value, but are also important. So my point is that the interest of this type of tool, this creative solution of using new technologies, is exactly the ambiguity of the solution. The fact that don't define specifically what is normative and not. In my view, they are an excellent implementation of the spirit of the convention, of what Clara Bortolot called the informality of the implementation of the convention. We need this space of informality to make it work, we need this space of creativity in using new technology in order to keep a registration flexible that respect the living nature of intangible cultural action. Thank you. I finished.